We'll move back in the room to Joey and then on to...
So listening there to the latest NASA briefing, they are on their way home. The Orion spacecraft has departed what they call the lunar sphere of influence, when the gravitational pull of the moon is stronger than the gravitational pull of Earth. But look what they've sent back. This is Earthset. You might remember the famous Apollo 8 photographs of Earthrise, and this has been replicated by the Artemis crew. As you can see there, a photograph of them with their glasses on in Orion, which is about the size of an SUV. They are now 229,000 miles from Earth, we've been told this evening. Splashdown is expected at 8:07 p.m. Eastern Time on Friday. That's about 1:07 in the morning here in the UK. And re-entry a little earlier, 7:53 Eastern Time. But they've had a very eventful 24 hours is what NASA have said. And so they have some extraordinary pictures. They've been speaking to the International Space Station. They've spoken to Donald Trump as well. They've carried out all sorts of scientific missions as well. And they've named new lunar craters, 2 freshly observed lunar craters that were observed. And one of them, they asked Houston if they could name it Carol, after Commander Reed Wiseman's wife, who died of cancer in 2020, saying it is a bright spot on the moon and we'd like to call it Carol. And apparently there was not a dry eye in the house. Molly, you're here joining us this evening. Molly Blackwell and Sebastian Payne, your thoughts on some really spectacular photographs that we've seen?
Yeah, it's pretty moving stuff. It makes you feel sort of pleasantly insignificant, I always find, but really been struck by some of the reflections that the astronauts have said. You know, one of the things that they said a few days ago was that from up here, you know, you all look the same, and maybe it's a message of unity that we really all need to hear at a very divided moment.
I mean, it also just shows what amazing scientific prowess as a species we've managed to pull together, because obviously Artemis 2 has not landed on the moon. I think that's what they're looking at for Artemis 3. But humans have gone further than anyone ever has before. And as you said, Anna, those extraordinary images from the dark side of the moon, looking back on Earth there, it really puts it all in perspective. But just amazing sight. And as I said, it's really something that does make the heart lift when you see it and you think about the expertise and the ingenuity to make this feat happen.
Well, certainly our science and technology editor, Tom Clark, is in that briefing in Houston. We will speak to him a little bit later, but Molly, you related the unity that we see from the Artemis mission to what we're seeing on planet Earth, and we are now just 3 hours away until that deadline imposed on Iran by Donald Trump expires to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, or else, the US president warned today, a whole civilization will die, never to be brought back again. An unnerving threat which could see a major escalation in the Middle East conflict. Tonight, interventions, though, from the likes of Pakistan and the Pope, trying to diffuse what has become an incendiary situation. Molly, Sebastian, we'll talk more about that in just a moment, but let's hear now from what Donald Trump had to say. So we've not seen Donald Trump so far. Let's see what he's posted on Truth Social then. A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen. It probably will. However, now that we have complete and total regime change, where different, smarter and less radicalised minds prevail, maybe something revolutionarily wonderful can happen. Who knows? We will find out tonight, one of the most important moments in the long and complex history of the world. 47 years of extortion, corruption and death will finally end. God bless the people, the great people of Iran. Well, tonight we're hearing that Pakistan, which has been acting as a mediator, has asked Donald Trump to extend his deadline by 2 weeks. So let's bring in our US correspondent, Mark Stone, who is outside the White House for us tonight. So, Mark, are we about to see another step back from the brink after what can only be described as historically inflammatory language from the US president?
Yeah, language without precedent from a US president. Absolutely extraordinary language to come on top of what he said only at the weekend, that expletive-laden tweet over the course of the weekend, followed by what you just read now. Look, first of all, is he serious? I mean, I was struck by conversations I've had today, private conversations with diplomats from various corners of the world, people who I have got to know over the years, and all of them were unable to offer me any assurance that they had any idea whether or not he might follow through. Not to erase a whole civilization, I don't think he could do that in the 4 hours that he says he would, but to carry out something massive. None of them could offer any reassurance, or indeed the reassurance of the governments that they represent, that they knew precisely what the president might do, that what the United States president might do, and I think that is absolutely extraordinary. Now, against that, we know there's a pattern. There is a pattern that very often, TACO as it's known, Trump always chickens out. Will he find an off-ramp? Will he extend? Will he turn this extraordinary ultimatum into his own success and create this moment where he will claim that only through this extraordinary negotiating tactic he has managed to pull something some diplomatic moment out of the bag? Look, we don't know. I think the hours ahead will be very, very important. But what's really important to stress is that he is a president like no other. The guardrails in America are largely gone. The different power structures in America have disappeared. He runs the show, and he's surrounded himself by a group of people who say yes to everything he does. Sycophants, frankly, and I think that is important context. Now, you mentioned the Pakistani Prime Minister, Prime Minister Sharif, who at the very last minute has come in with some language which I think represents, well, something more diplomatic than we have heard throughout this conflict. I'll read it to you. It's really important. Sharif says diplomatic efforts for peaceful settlement of the ongoing war in the Middle East are progressing steadily, strongly and powerfully, with the potential to lead to substantive results in the near future. He goes on to say, I allow diplomacy to run its course. I earnestly request President Trump to extend the deadline for 2 weeks. Pakistan, in all sincerity, requests the Iranian brothers to open the Strait of Hormuz for a corresponding period of 2 weeks as a goodwill gesture. We urge all warring parties to observe a ceasefire everywhere for 2 weeks to allow diplomacy to achieve conclusive termination of the war in the interest of long-term peace and the stability in the region. So that there, a statement posted by the Prime Minister of Pakistan on Twitter. We know that the President of the United States has seen it. His press secretary has confirmed that he is thinking about it. There is some chatter tonight that we could be close to a moment of breakthrough, a moment where the US President decides to extend the deadline. But the stakes truly are very, very high indeed. We can be in no doubt that if the Americans follow through on some form of action overnight, then the Iranians will respond. If they don't follow through, if they have an extension, well, then that weakens the American hand in negotiations going forward. And so either way, we're in a really, really tricky position tonight.
I mean, there's been such concern expressed about Donald Trump's use of language. The Pope, for example, said that it is truly unacceptable, reminding people that attacks on civilian populations and infrastructure are against international law. What happens about UK air bases, then, in the days ahead?
I think that's a really important point. It's a sort of British-focused point, but it's vital. There are two British bases, that have been used during the course of this war for America. America has been allowed use of them. One is Fairford in Gloucestershire. The other is Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. Now, the British position so far during this war has been that those bases can only be used. And remember, there was an argument at the beginning about whether they could be used. Initially, Starmer said no, and then once the war had begun, he said, yes, they can be used, but only for defensive action by the Americans. Well, nothing of what the President Trump is now threatening can be classed as defensive. And yet the British position in a statement from the Ministry of Defence this evening is we won't provide a running commentary on our allies' operations, including their use of our bases. The statement reiterates that they could only be used for defensive actions, but we won't provide a running commentary. Well, I think there will be many in the United Kingdom tonight who will be saying that that is precisely what the UK should be doing. They should be giving us clarity on what they believe President Trump is up to, because it doesn't sound as though what he is threatening is anything like defensive.
Mark, fascinating stuff as ever. Thank you very much, Dean. Mark Stone joining us there from the White House. Have to say, Sebastian, Molly, it is febrile out there tonight. Again, the UAE earlier said air defence systems were responding to a missile threat. Booms heard in Doha in Qatar, powerful explosions heard in Baghdad, and all sorts of comments from the Iranians, including Iran's top joint military command, saying it will deal with the infrastructure of the US and its allies in the region in a way that will deprive them from the region's oil and gas for years. That's one of multiple threats they've made tonight, including listing oil facilities such as Aramco in Saudi Arabia, you know, the world's biggest oil company, all sorts of threats from them. There's no sense that they are backing down, despite the fact that they have acknowledged discussions are continuing.
No, and it's almost trite to say this is unprecedented, because we've said that almost every week or month throughout the second Trump term, but this really is unprecedented now. And the language and tone from the White House has just escalated so much. I think we all know the Easter Sunday message, where past the watershed, probably shouldn't exactly use the language on TV, but the fact the president was talking that aggressive tone and talking about the end of a civilization. You know, I was quite struck by a message from Robert Harris, the novelist, who's written a lot about 20th century history, who said that if you read out that message from a leader at the Nuremberg trials, they would have thrown the book at them to say about, you know, the erasure of a civilization. Now, you could say maybe he doesn't mean it. Maybe it's just Trump kind of classic rhetoric. But the simple fact is he has said that. It is being taken seriously. And Iran, in return, is saying that, you know, threatening the same stuff as well. But I think we have to hope that these reports you were talking about of some kind of ceasefire, of some kind of pause on this thing, is the best that can be hoped for at the moment, as opposed to some rash action that could change the world forever.
Yes, profanities on Easter Sunday, you know, threats to the thousands-year-old civilization of Persia. You know, the inflammatory rhetoric certainly has taken another step. The world is hoping, you know, it doesn't materialise militarily now.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to say what's on Trump's mind. I'm not even sure Trump knows exactly what may happen, you know, and as your correspondent mentioned, there's been such a centralisation of power and concerns that really the people around who may have kept those traditions in place, those checks and balances, just aren't in post anymore. And potentially this is just the Donald Trump show. But, you know, as you alluded to, it's never quite clear what's a bluff with Trump. You know, he makes a lot of incendiary comments, and he is as much known for making these kind of threats as rowing back on them. You know, he has that nickname, which he hates reportedly, Taco. Trump always chickens out. We've seen a lot of flip-flopping in policy from him. Look to the tariffs, is a really good example of that. So he may be taking a hard line on this, but the rhetoric is so concerning that it's really hard to know just how far things could go tonight.
And I think your point about the guardrails is such an important one as well, because during the first Trump presidency, there was this sense that if there was ever any too much drastic action in terms of weapons or military action, you would have the army, the chiefs of the defence staff, Congress, the Supreme Court, all those traditional structures. Because if America is about one thing, it was about stopping one man from having too much power. I mean, that's why famously they broke away from us a couple of hundred years ago. But the fact is now that the president is operating in an imperial manner without those guardrails. And I think that is why the recent spate of messages have caused so much concern. Because as you said, Molly, in the past, you could maybe say, oh, well, he doesn't really mean that. He's just saying that. He's not going to do it. But now, maybe he will do it. And this, of course, goes back to the madman theory, which is that, you know, if you keep them guessing, you keep saying different things, how do you know exactly what they're going to do?
OK. Sebastian, Molly, stand by. Thank you very much indeed for now. We will take a look at the morning newspapers then for tomorrow. Let's start with The Guardian, which reports that the world is bracing itself after the US President Donald Trump's warning that a whole civilization will die in Iran. That is also the lead story for The Telegraph, which reports that world leaders are calling for calm amid the threats. The front of the Metro reads humanity's new historic view of a world in deep trouble as the crew of Artemis 2 look down at Earth amidst the escalating war in Iran. It's a similar take from the Mirror, which says the world holds its breath with regard to the US president's threats. The Daily Mail also goes with that line as peace talks go down to the wire. The Eye says the UK is making a plea for peace in response to Donald Trump's warning, while the Star describes the situation as the end of the world as we know it. The Financial Times says hedge funds are betting against European stocks, predicting that the continent will continue to be hit hard by the war. While The Sun leads on the banning of rapper Kanye West from the UK and the cancelling of the Wireless Music Festival, which he was set to headline. And meantime, The Express leads on comments from Rhiannon White, whose daughter was murdered by an asylum seeker, calling the UK a laughingstock when it comes to immigration. Well, let's talk now then with Sebastian and with Molly. So many of the newspapers intertwining, you know, the views of planet Earth from the Artemis 2 mission with what we're seeing with Trump's comments. And The Guardian, for example, Molly, outrage and fear as Trump warns that the whole civilization will die in Iran.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be the strongest thing we've potentially ever heard, you know, from the US president, a man who is known for punchy, often alarming rhetoric. But this just seems to be another level. I mean, this all centres obviously around the Strait of Hormuz, that crucial waterway through which around 20% of the world's oil and gas usually transits. And this waterway really is Iran's sort of key leverage in this conflict. You know, it can't compete militarily with the capabilities and sort of extensiveness that the US and Israel has to play with. But what it can do is disrupt global shipping and try and disrupt the global economy. And it's been doing a very effective job on that. We've seen oil prices spiking, which is going to have knock-on effects on costs of energy and subsequently all sorts of products around the world. And it does seem that because this is so important to Iran as leverage, it's unlikely to give it up, you know, without a fight. It's unlikely to give that up very easily. But then we're entering this stalemate. And I think this all really shows that, you know, even the biggest military in the world, the US, there is a limit to what hard power can do here. They haven't been able to bring about regime change in Iran. And they haven't been able to open the Strait of Hormuz, you know, so they continue to launch these bombing campaigns, but somehow Iran is still holding on.
And strangely, the US and Israeli action in Iran has given Iran power over the Strait of Hormuz. The Daily Mail talks about the sort of the human shield idea here, the fact that women and children, you know, waving flags have formed a human chain on what they call the White Bridge in the central Iranian city of Ahvaz, you know, because of the threat by Donald Trump to target power stations and bridges, which even the Pope has said is against international law.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things from these images of the human change. First of all, it's a reminder we know so little about Iranian society and where opinion is, that Donald Trump's basis was if you take out the theocracy in Tehran, there will be this great popular uprising and it will be replaced with essentially a more Western-friendly regime. Now, that may still happen because the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard, you know, it's 125,000 strong. They still have all the weapons. The population is still subjugated by them in many respects. But this is also a sign there's still a lot of popularity amongst the wider Iranian population for the regime, and that's why people are forming this human chain, which has no doubt been given more prominence, that viewpoint, by the attacks from Israel and America on that. But it's also a reminder as well that there's just no easy way out of this, is there? Because the fact is that this closing the Strait of Hormuz was always a theoretical point that Iran could threaten in negotiations, whether it was about nuclear spectacular, whether it's about sanctions or international trade. Now they've proven they can do this. So if there are any negotiations in the future, they're always going to say, well, we can just do this once all over again, that we can do this. And as you said, Molly, knock off 20% of the world's oil supply and disrupt shipping across all these countries. So this comes back to the single problem is, what is the way out of this? And, you know, does Donald Trump try and finish the job, whatever that looks like?
These are the human change pictures we've been given. I mean, clearly, it's not easy for us to verify the date often of these, or you know, and sometimes location as well. But you know, and clearly people have been urged to go there, because what does a bomber do when they see pictures like that when they're targeting a bridge? Now, some people say that the bridges might be near strategic, militarily strategic locations, and therefore justifiable as an act of war. But this makes it very tricky, doesn't it, for the Americans looking on?
It does, and it opens up the whole question about, you know, the Geneva Convention and conduct within war, because many of Donald Trump's most incendiary posts over the last week have talked about things that would all be the definition of war crime in terms of targeting civilian infrastructure, energy infrastructure, as opposed to military targets, which is the normal conduct of war. But the Iranian regime isn't going to play by the Geneva Convention at all. You know, this is a regime that machine gunned 40,000 of its own citizens in protest. So we should be very clear these are still very, very bad people, and the best thing for the people around with them to be free. But it's so hard to know what's going to happen next. It could be everything, it could be nothing.
Yeah, let's just look at the eye as well on our way through. Keir Starmer, the paper says, appealed to Donald Trump to strike a peace deal with Tehran. We know he is not alone. Italy's Prime Minister as well. Iran's civilian population must not be made to pay for the actions of its government. And also a Republican representative has spoken out. This is Nathaniel Moran from Texas, said he does not support the destruction of a whole civilization. That is not who we are, and is not consistent with the principles that have long guided America, he said in a post on X. So questions now within the Republican Party too after the use of this language.
100%. I mean, I would be really interested to know what his MAGA base are thinking about all of this. I mean, let us not forget, this seems to be the opposite of what they voted for. Trump was elected on a promise to reduce US military interventions overseas, to end their involvement in what he described as forever war. And we've seen the total opposite of that. We've seen Venezuela, and now we've seen Iran. And I mean, just last week, the White House has requested $1.5 trillion for defence, at the same time as announcing domestic aid cuts. So how this is what the MAGA base voted for, I'm not sure. But with regards to the Eye's front page, I think it raises a really interesting point around the nature of the special relationship. In all honesty, it would be helpful if at this point it was a little stronger and we felt that the UK had greater leverage. We've seen that really break down over disagreements in the war and insults towards Starmer. So what leverage do we really have over America?
Well, you see, all the papers we've shown so far pretty much have released those pictures that NASA has. Amazing photographs taken from the far side of the moon by the Artemis 2 crew during their historic lunar flyby. The incredible image... Apologies. Incredible images certainly captured from the Orion spacecraft, taken as the Earth slipped below the moon's horizon. The image I'm talking about is called Earthset. I wonder if we can see it again. A reference, of course, to the famous Earthrise, shot from 1968 by Apollo 8. An iconic image then, as you can see there, taken from Apollo 8, the first manned mission to orbit the moon. Well, the Artemis 2 crew are now beginning their journey home. A splashdown in the Pacific set for Friday. And as we brought you at the top of the show, NASA has been giving a briefing on their mission from Houston. Our science and technology editor, Tom Clark, was in the room, and he asked about how happy the crew is so far.
Our Orion team is so pleased with really everything, the way that it's performing, the engines, the manual control that you've heard us talk about several times, that the crew have just gone over and over about how well that's performing, how nicely the Orion crew module is handling. The service module, again, providing everything that we need. Yeah, we've had a couple of challenges, but overall, I mean, I think they're pretty minor in the whole grand scheme of things. The hardware itself performing extremely well. We're really looking forward to turning this around and flying again in a year, and then again a year after that. I think this hardware is really spectacular, and we're really looking forward to doing this more often.
Ambitious indeed. Well, let's speak to Tom now, who joins us from Houston. Just wow, I think she said, didn't she, about the pictures that have been released by the Artemis 2 crew. I mean, for someone like me who absolutely loves that Earthrise picture from Apollo 8, the photographs released today truly are breathtaking, Tom.
Absolutely spectacular. I don't think there's any other way of saying it. You know, there are certain people out there, and I have to admit at times I've been one of them, who've questioned the value of sending humans into space. It's a very expensive, very risky endeavour, given we can get amazing images with satellites and with space telescopes for much less cost. Yet looking at those pictures, you just have to stop and think, wow, it's almost worth it just for those. Really spectacular. The scientists can learn a lot from as well. As we try and get them and hang them on the wall in our bathrooms, because that's certainly what I'm going to do with the copies I can get my hands on. Yeah, a huge success. The question I was asking there very much about how prepared they are for re-entry to Earth, because that is going to be the next most risky part of this mission. How happy are they with the hardware, with that spacecraft, to get them safely back to Earth, and then that risky phase of going at very high speed through the Earth's atmosphere that's going to put the highest stresses on the vehicle.
Yes, and we had timings for that, didn't we? 8:07 p.m. for Splashdown Eastern Time, so, just after 1 o'clock in the morning on Friday. But in terms of the achievements so far, obviously naming fresh craters, which was a very emotional thing. Are they looking for landing sites as well? And is it all now about how to get humans back on the moon after so many decades?
That's absolutely the whole purpose of Artemis 2 is the hardware test of the Orion capsule and the spacecraft that's going to get it into lunar orbit. Next is Artemis 3. That is a mission to test some of that, more of that hardware, including a landing vehicle to get astronauts down onto the lunar surface in Earth orbit. And then Artemis 4, and that's currently scheduled, a very ambitious 2028, to perform a landing on the moon. They were hoping to get better views of the south pole of the moon to look at potential landing sites for that Artemis 4 mission. The way the orbital dynamics didn't work out quite to give them the best opportunity for that. It wasn't lit in the best way, but it gave them lots of other interesting scientific targets. But there are more missions to come to do that reconnaissance, a lot of them robotic. They're talking about putting drones down on the lunar surface to hop around and do some mapping and to recce those sites. They need somewhere where they can safely land, but also where there's an opportunity to get water, because they need to fuel their spacecraft, have something to drink to build a lunar base on the surface. So there's lots of work building towards that. And I think it's fair to say that so far at least, and again, there's a big moment with the re-entry coming up, Artemis 2 has been a big success and therefore a big step towards that much wider and more ambitious lunar program for NASA. And let's not forget its international partners. Europe built the service module that's carried the Orion capsule all the way and is bringing them back. That's the engines, the life support, the drinking water, and the breathable air.
Some pride from that. You look at the pictures of them inside Orion, and they all seem to be on top of each other. And I know you've seen a mock-up. This is really tiny, isn't it? I mean, what a look. And we keep hearing questions about the toilet. The living conditions are fascinating.
It really. So today, earlier today, we got to have a visit of the mock-up of the capsule that the astronauts trained in before the mission, and they're using now here on the ground to troubleshoot any problems in the air and in space. And the thing that just struck me straight away is just how small it is. I mean, they say it's the size of 2 minivans, but I think that's the volume. Once it's taken up with all the equipment, the floor's gone in, there's a tiny hatch for that toilet in the floor, which obviously in space isn't the floor, everything's either way up. It's not much bigger than a family tent, and you've got 4 big humans in there, for 10 days, and they can't nip outside for a breath of fresh air. That's the thing that really struck me. It's close quarters, and I think it's going to take a certain type of person just to do a 10-day mission like this. The missions we're talking about doing in future to the moon will require longer stays in orbit around the moon than on the surface, and if and beyond that, to asteroids or Mars. you're going to have some sort of special kind of characters to endure those conditions, let alone what they might find when they get there.
Yes. And one slightly strange question, Tom, that 1968 Apollo 8 Earthrise picture was seen as a sort of almost a launch pad for the global environmental movement, you know, seeing the beauty of this dot of blue. The papers for tomorrow here are talking about humanity and seeing all of humanity, you know, beyond the moon, when actually we're at war with Trump's threats. You know, when we see Earth from so far, it really has an impact on us, doesn't it?
It does, and I think that Earthrise image was so iconic, and it is now well established. It kick-started not just the environmental movement, but also an awareness of our solitude on Earth. And we saw that yesterday, you know, the views back from the moon, just how small we are. We're a sort of crescent planet. And I'd like to hope that that image, you know, recreated for the modern age in 4K HD, you know, is going to rekindle some of that idea. It will be interesting to see whether this time around it will have that same effect. I think it's really interesting to see, you know, just the contrast in language from President Trump when he was talking about Iran yesterday at Easter or earlier today even, with the way he spoke to the crew on the mission in a quick radio call yesterday, because, you know, they've only echoed language about neighbourliness and humankind, but it's certainly not what we're hearing messaging-wise very much from the president at the moment. I'd like to hope that we see a little bit more togetherness come from that, and I think that might be one measure of the success of this mission more widely across the world. I'd be interested to see how it plays out once they're safely back on the ground.
Tom, you have a fantastic seat of space history there. Enjoy every moment, won't you? As they said, or as Lovell said to the crew, you know, enjoy the view. I hope you are as well. Thank you very much indeed for joining us from Houston. Yes, newspapers like the Daily Mirror, for example, an extraordinary glimpse of Earth from the Orion spacecraft after a journey that represents the very best of humanity. Yet our precious home continues to be torn apart by the worst of it. And as a maniac in the White House threatens to obliterate a whole civilization, the world holds its breath. The front page of the Daily Mirror there. So relating the two, as I said, Sebastian.
Yes, I mean, the Mirror's, I would say, laying it on quite thick with its front page there. But look, it is clear that there's such a contrast between the beauty of the planet and the kind of the chaos in our global politics, which is more volatile, as we've been talking about, than at any time in recent decades. But hopefully, the start of the Artemis missions, as we were hearing from Tom, which will roll on throughout the next coming years, that will hopefully something a lot of different countries will get behind. You know, we saw that with the International Space Station in the 1990s, where countries did all collaborate and still continue to collaborate to work together, whereas the Apollo missions were very much obviously an America-driven thing as well. So there is a little bit of a kind of a silver line there, if you want to say, by the fact that the Artemis missions have been lots of countries coming and working together for the exploration of humanity.
Yes, and more pictures no doubt will come. Let's briefly look at the sun, even not the shun, the sun. No can do. This is the news of Kanye West and the music festival, which has now been axed.
Yes, indeed. So we understand that Kanye West made an application to come to the UK yesterday. This has been blocked by the Home Office. On the grounds, they say that his, or insiders say at least, that his presence would not be conducive to the public good. And then almost immediately, the festival was cancelled. He was, I believe, the headliner for all 3 days. So it really was the Kanye show, and without him, it seems to have fallen apart. But it had been in hot water over the weekend. We saw major sponsors pulling out with some serious questions over whether it would be able to continue. And obviously this follows really serious issues with anti-Semitism from Kanye West. He has made some horrendous remarks and done some horrendous things, but he has blamed that on his bipolar disorder. He came out earlier this year and said this had destroyed his life and detached him from reality. And I think now the question that's being faced is how do you move forward from that? You know, what does he need to do to rehabilitate himself? I think lots of people might say maybe start with rebuilding, you know, connections before you start making music again.
Yes, certainly he has issued a statement. We will have more on that in the next hour of our programme. Molly, Sebastian, thank you very much indeed. So Trump's threats, the Artemis mission, back with more on The Wrap in the next hour.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
We've done the work and the reading, so you don't have to.
Being a Sky News presenter.
Hello and welcome. Westminster, the heart of British politics. I'm so sorry about what happened to you. So what on earth is going on?
It's not true.
Can I tell you what I think? It's really unusual. Mornings with Richard and Frost. Let's crack on. Let's get started.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
Who's funnier?
Being a Sky News journalist.
A special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim.
Pakistan has the right to respond.
You're like, what?
Historic day here today.
Congratulations, this is a huge moment.
But what happens now?
Tonight on The Wrap, the US president threatens to wipe out Iran's civilization unless it agrees to reopen the Strait of Hormuz by 1 a.m. tonight, UK time. But could Pakistan offer a glimmer of hope? Iranian state media releases images appearing to show people protesting outside power stations and bridges inside the country. The government says nay to yay. The wireless festival is cancelled as the rapper Kanye West is blocked from entering the UK for his anti-Semitic remarks. The first photo from the far side of the moon is released as the Artemis 2 crew begin a 4-day journey home, having travelled further from Earth than any humans before. And checking out the row over the Waitrose employee sacked for tackling a shoplifter stealing Easter eggs. Well, we discuss the day's biggest stories with Molly Blackall and Sebastian Payne. Plus a first look at the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers, including a denial from the White House that it's considering using nuclear weapons in the Iran war. Well, hello and good evening to you, and welcome to Sebastian and to Molly. We are just 2 hours away until the deadline imposed on Iran by Donald Trump expires to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, or else, the US president warned today, a whole civilization will die, never to be brought back again. An unnerving threat which could see a major escalation in the Middle East conflict. But tonight, interventions from the likes of Pakistan and the Pope trying to diffuse what's become an incendiary situation. Well, Molly, Sebastian, an escalation already in the use of Donald Trump's language.
Yes, we've become very used to saying we've never seen anything like this before, but the language and the rhetoric from the White House over the past couple of days has really been another level, which I think has set everyone's alarm bells off, possibly rightly so.
Molly?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's always hard to know exactly what's a bluff with Donald Trump. He is known for rowing back as much as he is making these threats. But certainly this is a potentially terrifying escalation in what is already an incredibly bloody war.
Well, we've not seen Donald Trump so far today, but here is what he has posted on Truth Social. A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will. However, now that we have complete and total regime change, where different, smarter and less radicalised minds prevail, maybe something revolutionary, wonderful can happen. Who knows? We will find out tonight, one of the most important moments in the long and complex history of the world. 47 years of extortion, he says, corruption and death will finally end. God bless the great people of Iran. While trying to calm the situation, in a post on X, the Prime Minister of Pakistan said, "To allow diplomacy to run its course, I earnestly request President Trump to extend the deadline for 2 weeks." Pakistan, in all sincerity, requests the Iranian brothers to open the Strait of Hormuz for a corresponding period of 2 weeks as a goodwill gesture. We'll wait to see how that plays out. I think the Turks and the Pakistanis have been speaking to each other tonight, but you know, we are hours away from this real prospect of escalation in the conflict, which is already febrile. There have been a number of attacks this evening.
But that is really the question, though. Is it going to be a moment of escalation or not? And that's what we really don't know. And I think you completely hit the nail on the head, Molly, about this question about, is this just new, beefed-up rhetoric from the White House, or is there something actually going on here that could lead to a serious escalation within this war? And it's so hard to tell. That we've seen throughout today various strikes on both sides, with reports America has said infrastructure on Karg Island, which is this key island just off the coast of Iran where it's used for oil export, but it's not actually hit the oil terminals from what we hear as well. But this deadline is something the president has been ramping up and talking to. And so it feels like this is very serious, or at least he wants it to be seen as serious. But every time we've come to a crunch point with Trump in the second term of his presidency, he's always pulled back from the edge. This is the so-called taco. Trump always chickens out, which is something he very much dislikes. But what we don't know, is this taco, or is this really going to be something much more serious here? And there's clearly shuttlecock diplomacy going on behind the scenes here between Turkey and Pakistan and Iran and America, trying not let this escalate even further. But what is, I think, clear, the president's attention span, which is maybe not the best at the best of times, is rapidly running out. He's fed up of the Strait of Hormuz being closed and wants to simply get it open. And we saw that very brusque tweet on Easter Sunday that alluded to that. The question is it going to work, or are we going to wake up tomorrow morning and see a different world?
Well, Iran threatening back, certainly tonight. Their top military command says it will deal with infrastructure of US and its allies in the region in a way that will deprive them from the region's oil and gas for years, going on to say that they will continue attacks on military, security and economic infrastructure of Israel and the US in the region with greater intensity. And protectively, you know, they seem to have these human chains on bridges now as well, don't they? You know, getting the people of Iran to come out, wave flags, women and children, to prevent bombing, because the threat is against power stations and bridges in Iran.
For sure. It's hard to know how organic those types of gestures are versus how much they're enforced. This is a country which has huge and repressive state control. But nonetheless, all of that changes the calculation for the US. They go from being, infrastructure targets to being human targets, and that massively increases the cost. But as you say, Anna, Iran warning that it too has cards in its hands, and it does. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard was saying that they're willing to retaliate beyond the region, unclear as yet as to where they're referring to. They've hit US bases across the Middle East and also the crucial area of the Strait of Hormuz. That waterway is absolutely critical to the global economy, around 20% of the world's oil and gas travelling through it. And Iran has proved successfully that it can effectively turn off the tap when it wants to, and it's not going to be willing to give that card up very easily.
We see The Guardian there, outrage and fear as Trump warns a whole civilization will die in Iran. Even Pope Leo has called the comments truly unacceptable, reminding President Trump that actually attacks on civilian infrastructure are against international law, potentially, some have said, a war crime.
So it is interesting. We seem to have crossed a line here with President Trump's comments about the erasure of a civilization, because even that language in itself sounds genocidal in a way. But then you've also got the specific threats when it comes to civilian infrastructure, which under the Geneva Convention does constitute war crime. And the president has talked about targeting bridges, targeting about energy, not just military bases in the kind of skirmish you've seen so far. But again, we reiterate the point, does he really mean this? Because if you're saying the erasure of a civilization, does he mean, if he means the IRGC and the theocracy in Tehran, well, he said before that he wants to see a new regime and would like to see the people of Iran rise up, which is a bit more difficult than just tweeted, because there's the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, which is 125,000 strong, and they have all the guns in this situation. But, obviously the Persian people have one of the richest cultural legacies of any peoples on this planet. So if you're talking about a civilization, then the Persian people's civilization goes way back beyond the current state of Iran as we know it. So it's hard to know if he's thinking about that or he's talking about something just specifically about Iran itself. But I think you've seen people from across the political spectrum in America being really unhappy about this. You've seen Republicans. I saw Marjorie Taylor Greene, which, if you remember her, who was the most MAGA of MAGA, and she came out and said, invoke the 25th Amendment now, which is the basis to remove a president from office. So clearly there's a big divide in the MAGA base in America, as well as the international community.
Yeah, she was excoriating about that Truth Social post on Easter Sunday specifically, wasn't she? Yes, we wait to see what happens. Clearly, the Pakistanis have reached out, suggesting a 2-week delay in the threats that have been proffered by Donald Trump, and a 2-week opening of the Strait of Hormuz as a gesture of goodwill from the Iranians. 1 a.m. is the deadline UK time. We'll see certainly what happens. In the meantime, let's move on to the news of the rapper Kanye West, who may have held out an olive branch of sorts, offering to meet Jewish community leaders, angry at his past anti-Semitic remarks. But it was not enough. The government has decided he is not welcome in the UK, where he was due to headline the Wireless Festival. And now the event's organisers, facing sponsorship boycotts, have decided to call the whole thing off. Here, then, is Lisa Holland. Her report contains some flash photography.
Kanye West says he wants to build bridges with Britain's Jewish community. But the global hip-hop star, who also refers to himself as Ye, has been blocked from travelling to the UK by the government after years of anti-Semitic behaviour. He was due to headline London's Wireless Festival. After cancelling the event, promoter Festival Republic said, "Anti-Semitism in all its forms is abhorrent, and we recognise the real and personal impact these issues have had." As Ye said today, he acknowledges that words alone are not enough, and in spite of this, still hopes to be given the opportunity to begin a conversation with the Jewish community in the UK.
I used to be in his top 1% of listeners on Spotify, but
Wow.
I don't listen to him anymore out of principle.
A-level students Geordie and Zach are members of Britain's Jewish community. They would have liked to have gone to the festival, but not with Kanye West performing.
What would it take for him to be
accepted and to be given a visa and allowed to come to the UK?
The main thing that he needs to focus on is both educating himself and his followers. He's said atrocious things, and he needs to learn more about the very actions that he's maybe denying or distorting or condoning.
I don't think he should have been allowed to perform, but I don't like the precedent that that the government can just block somebody from coming to the UK because of what they've said in the past.
For the past few years, Kanye West has courted controversy over his anti-Semitic comments and actions, including releasing a song called Heil Hitler and advertising a swastika T-shirt for sale on his website. He later apologised, citing mental health problems. He said he wanted to meet with the Jewish community, but that was never likely to happen until the festival organisers cancelled the event.
This was a wrong decision to invite Kanye in the first instance. They should have done the decent thing and cancelled it once they saw the concern there was, and now it's all fallen apart.
I think the tickets were quite expensive, so they got to be refunded. It's a whole mess that, quite honestly, was totally unnecessary.
In Finsbury Park, where the festival was due to take place, there was some sympathy for Kanye West.
He had his issues, but I feel like, you know, that was because of his mental health.
The Home Office said Kanye West's presence at the festival would not be conducive to the public good. Lisa Holland, Sky News.
Sebastian, your views of what has happened. Has the government effectively cancelled a music festival? Is that one way of looking at this?
Well, they have, and I think it's entirely the music festival's fault for booking Kanye West in the first place, that his legacy of stuff, it takes about 10 seconds to look on Wikipedia to find out every single level of unacceptable thing that he said. Now, Mr. West has said that he's had mental health issues and blamed a 2002 car crash where he was then diagnosed with bipolar disorder for what he said. I don't think that's really a good enough excuse when you've had a song called Heil Hitler and you've used swastika emblems. You've openly said that he is a Nazi. He's called himself a Nazi in his elements. What on earth was the Wireless Festival doing to book this person in this way? Because he's been trying to do some kind of comeback, that he put a full-page advert in the Wall Street Journal earlier this year apologising for his anti-Semitism. He sat down with some Jewish leaders in America to apologise and try and understand what he did. Hasn't done that here, though, in the UK. And I think if he was trying to make a British comeback, that would have been the way to do it, to engage with the Jewish community, explain his mental health issues and where he came from, allow them to explain why this is so hurtful and damaging at a time when anti-Semitism in the UK is growing all the time. That last year saw the second highest ever recorded level of anti-Semitic incidents within the UK. And this sort of thing is just more fire on that kind of tinderbox. But the government were in a difficult situation. You know, I don't like the idea of the government deciding who should be standing up at music festivals or not. It's not their job to do that, but it's the Wireless Festival's fault. They shouldn't have booked him in the first place, knowing this would have happened. And, you know, the government did all they could really do in this situation, which was to stop him from coming, because it would have risked unrest.
Yeah, why did the whole festival have to be cancelled? Is it because he was the main act that those thousands of ticket holders were waiting to see?
Sounds like a combination of things. I think he was headlining all 3 nights, which is quite unusual for festival lineups, and really shows it was all about Kanye West. And obviously without him there, the whole sort of agenda falls apart. But also they've had sponsorship issues. There were several high-profile sponsors pulling out over the course of the weekend as this all unfolded. So it's kind of hard to know exactly what tipped the balance. But Wireless came out very quickly after the government's decision was announced and said that the whole thing had folded. So it seemed like it had basically imploded potentially from a couple of different perspectives.
Fascinating. So, you know, what happens now? Do festival bookers have to be very careful, you know, to work out why and how they book these headliners?
Yeah, but I mean, you don't have to be careful with Kanye West. Like, it's so obvious that the guy has said some completely unacceptable, highly offensive things towards Jews in this country and Jews across the planet, that he should never have been booked with in the first place. As I was saying, I don't think you want a situation where the Home Secretary is describing who can or cannot headline a festival, because you're going back to the days of when the Lord Chamberlain used to have to sign off what plays were acceptable on the West End and whether, you know, Lady Chatterley's Lover and whether you had book censorship. We don't want to go back to that. But the onus is therefore on festivals to not book stupid people with stupid things that are clearly going to be offensive. Then you don't get into this mess.
OK, well, let's return to our top story now. Donald Trump's chilling threat to Iran. Our US correspondent Mark Stone is in Washington, just hot-footed it back from the White House. It looks like the Pakistanis are now speaking to the Egyptians. They've spoken to the Turks as well, Mark. Any updates for us? And have we had any response properly now from the White House to Pakistan's, you know, urging for a 2-week delay?
To your last point, no. But as I left the White House 25 minutes ago or so, the president was still in the West Wing, and so he's clearly working, not going to leave there just yet. He's aware of this proposal by the Pakistani Prime Minister, by the Pakistani government. They're one of a number of countries that are involved in mediating and trying to find some common ground. As you mentioned, Egypt is another, Turkey is another. Clearly, there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes, which sounds to me to be like work to persuade the American president to back down. Yes, they're clearly trying to get the Iranians to the right place, but the deadline is imposed by the American president. There's something else that's interesting about the deadline. We've been talking through the course of the day about, you know, what precisely is Donald Trump demanding, because he said different things, sometimes within the same sentence. Is he demanding of Iran that they open up the Strait of Hormuz, which, by the way, is already open to some countries? The Iranians are effectively operating a toll system right now, where some countries who they like are being allowed, their ships are being allowed to go straight through. Others, many countries from the West, are not being allowed through. So is President Trump demanding that stops and that there is a free flow of oil traffic through the Strait of Hormuz? Is that all he's asking for? At times he said yes, although, by the way, a few weeks ago, or just a few days ago, in fact, he said that the Strait of Hormuz didn't matter to the United States. So is it just that he's demanding by 8 o'clock tonight Eastern time, or is it that plus no nuclear weapons and no ballistic missiles? He's said different things at different points. Now, that's confusing, but it's also kind of neat and useful for him, because it allows him to kind of define his own, to define when his own deadline has been met. It sort of provides him with a back pocket off-ramp should he want to take it. Now, there are clearly plenty of people who say Trump always chickens out. In, what is it, a couple of hours, he will have chickened out, and he will agree with the offer set by the Pakistanis, and will be back into another 2-week cycle. Maybe, but against that, you have to remember a few things. He is the president of the United States. He runs a country which is very different from what it was like just a year ago. The branches of government, the 3 individual equal branches of government, are frankly not equal at the moment. Congress is, you know, spineless, toothless, cannot do anything. The Supreme Court, which could perhaps put into place some legal block for the president, that is weighted in his favour. President Trump runs the show. It is his show, and the people around him in the White House are the people he handpicked because he knew they would be loyal. That is why this is such an unprecedented moment.
Yeah, well said, Mark. Fascinating stuff. Spineless, toothless Congress, ruling as a royal court, Molly, effectively. I see that some Republicans and White House aides have, you know, defended Trump's comments as a negotiating tactic, but saying that a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. is the most extraordinary sentence if you see it in cold light of day.
Absolutely, it's chilling, and they say this a lot, it's just negotiations, but this stuff does have an impact, and who knows where Donald Trump will take it. He's such an unpredictable person, and he's so guided really by himself and a very small pool of people around him. But I think this speaks to the problems that we've seen from the start with this war, where the end game has just never been clear. At the start, it was about the nuclear program. Tonight, it's about the Strait of Hormuz, but it seems also to be about regime change, and now the whole Persian civilization. And we're seeing competing narratives, even from within the US itself. We have Trump saying that they're negotiating and this will all be over soon. And then we have his Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, saying we negotiate with bombs and implying they're just getting started. So nobody knows, potentially in the Oval Office even, what is happening next.
Let me just go to Mark Stone again. Mark, we had this peculiar situation where the US Vice President, J.D. Vance, was in Hungary supporting the current leadership there, Orban, ahead of elections this weekend. You know, we know the Hungarians still buy Russian oil, and yet America is at war against Iran, which is an ally of Russia. You know, you've got a geopolitical meshing which is extremely confusing for people to see.
It's truly, truly confusing. Yeah, I mean, Viktor Orban is, you know, he's the bogeyman of Europe. His country is the country that has been a thorn in the side of the EU for many, many years. And we have the Vice President focusing on that country in Hungary and calling or supporting Viktor Orban in his re-election bid. I mean, it's topsy-turvy stuff, and it has been for some time now. Incidentally, the Secretary General of NATO is due to be here in the morning, Mark Rutte, so-called the Trump whisperer. Who knows what he will try to whisper into Trump's ear in the Oval Office tomorrow. Who knows where we'll be tomorrow, given these extraordinary bombastic threats that the president is now making. There's another point as well. The King Charles is supposed to be coming here for a state visit in just a few weeks' time. For many people, I mean, it's been discussed a lot since the announcement came last week. Is it the right time for the King to come, to be seen next to President Trump? Look how much has moved since that announcement was made. We now have a president threatening to erase a civilization in an official statement from the White House, and yet King Charles is being asked by the British government to come here and do all the stuff that kings are supposed to do on visits to countries like this. It's pretty extraordinary stuff.
And at a time where Donald Trump has criticised the UK in terms of its role in the war, the UK bases, air bases, for example, and also support and NATO. You know, it's really fascinating. Just very quickly, Sebastian, your thoughts. Mark, thank you very much indeed for updating us there as we look ahead to 1 a.m. UK, 8 Eastern.
I think to pick up what Mark was saying about the UK's role in this, it's going to get increasingly awkward for Keir Starmer that he's trying to make some political capital from this by saying he's kept the UK out of a war, which, I mean, he has to a point, but also, obviously, the war has come to us with Iran attacking British air bases, British military assets within that. But this King's visit to America, I mean, the timing is beyond a political satire of when you would write this to send the monarch there on the 250th anniversary of America, which of course itself a celebration of the breakaway from the United Kingdom. But, you know, it is the diplomacy of this is really going to be tough, and the choreography will put all of that royal know-how to its absolute limits to navigate that very tight line between the fact that Donald Trump has attacked Canada, he's attacked the UK, he's attacked the UK Prime Minister, and will want to make it all about him. But he has a great respect for the royal family as well. But I think, you know, again, that feels like a long way off from where we are this evening.
Well, we're going to go a long way off now, 229,000 miles off exactly, which is where the Orion spacecraft is now. NASA has released, look at these amazing pictures taken from the far side of the moon by the Artemis 2 crew during their historic lunar flyby. So the incredible images captured from the Orion spacecraft, taken as the Earth slipped below the moon's horizon. Let's take a look at one of them. It has been dubbed... No, that's not it, actually. We need Earthset, a reference to the famous Earthrise shot from 1968. That iconic image, there you go, that's the Earth set shot. An iconic image was taken from Apollo 8, the first manned mission to orbit the moon. There we are, that's the 1968 shot, really famous and, you know, supposed to have heralded or helped spur the global environmental movement, that photo. Anyway, the Artemis 2 crew are now beginning their journey home with a splashdown in the Pacific set for Friday. And earlier the crew spoke to astronauts, in fact, on the International Space Station. Here's what they had to say.
Such a pleasure to be spending a little bit of time with our colleagues in space, and we talk so much up here, or we try to anyway, emphasize how important the work is that we're all doing in this program to do the types of things that get us ready to get back on the surface of the moon, and like the administrator was saying yesterday, onto Mars. And so we just appreciate you, and it's fun to be up in space with you at the same time.
We are so excited to be up here with you.
Yeah, lovely stuff, that. Well, earlier tonight, NASA gave a briefing on their mission from Houston, and our science and technology editor, Tom Clark, was in the room.
I'm looking to get a kind of overall perspective on how happy you've been with Orion and the European Service Module. What are you definitely going to have to fix before you fly it again? And how confident are you looking ahead to re-entry?
I'm not sure I heard the end of the question. You talked about the, you know, how the Orion is performing, and it's performing spectacularly. I have to tell you, our Orion team is so pleased with really everything the way that it's performing. The engines, the manual control that you've heard us talk about several times, that the crew have just gone over and over about how well that's performing, how nicely the Orion crew module is handling. The service module, again, providing everything that we need. Yeah, we've had a couple of challenges, but overall, I mean, I think they're pretty minor in the whole grand scheme of things. The hardware itself performing extremely well. We're really looking forward to turning this around and flying again in a year, and then again a year after that. I think this hardware is really spectacular, and we're really looking forward to doing this more often.
Yes, doing this more often. Ambitious stuff, certainly, from NASA, who must be delighted with how it's going so far. They've got the bragging rights of going further into space than any human has ever before. They've taken some amazing photographs, as we've seen already, and they're on their way home. And anyone who's seen the film Apollo 13 knows about the slingshot, using the gravity of the moon to bring yourself back in a sort of celestial figure of 8, they call it, don't they?
Yeah.
But, you know, what do you make of it so far?
It's been breathtaking, and, you know, some of the things I've enjoyed the most, as well as the images, are the reflections that the astronauts have had. I mean, they get this totally unique perspective, very literally, you know, on life here on Earth. And it's been overwhelmingly a message of unity, of how small we look, but also how homogenous we look. You know, one of them said last week, from up here, you all look like one thing and one people. And I think it is really stark when we're facing some of the rhetoric that we're seeing from Donald Trump about killing off a whole civilization. To be reminded of that unity and the bigger picture, I think, might be really what we all need.
And that extraordinary moment of speaking to the crew on the International Space Station, because you are the only people not on planet Earth, and you're looking at planet Earth. I mean, it is all a bit mind-blowing at that point, isn't it?
Well, there's one word, which, of course, is perspective, is what it puts into when you see everything there and you think about all of the ups and downs and all the billions of people on our planet, and it's in that one shot contains everything of our humanity and our civilization. It's really just remarkable. And I think for a lot of people, including my generation, it's the first time we've experienced anything like this in our lifetimes, because it comes many decades after the Apollo missions. We always forget, well, not always, but we sometimes forget, the International Space Station, which is an amazing feat that is still there and a great example of nations working together, but so too are the Artemis missions. And I think the optimism you hear from the NASA scientists about having a rolling stream of missions to get close to the moon and looking to eventually land on the moon again, the idea to return to that feels such a wonderful ambition and something serious that's been achieved there, despite all the ups and downs that we talk about, well, on programmes like this every night.
It has amused me, though, all the discussion of toilets in all of this, because it's so profound and so beautiful, and then everyone's just so fascinated by the toilet. And I have to say, if I was as accomplished as these astronauts, and I spent my time doing these incredible things, and all people wanted to ask me about was the state of my loo, I would be a bit miffed.
Yes. It's a reminder, though, of course, that no matter how big and optimistic we look about things, we all come back down to the most basic instincts.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly most of the newspapers have picked up on that Earth set after the 1968 Earthrise. So it is time now at hour to take a look at what is making the front pages then of tomorrow's newspapers. The pictures you can see on the front page of The Guardian. The lead story, though, is that the world is bracing itself after the US President Donald Trump warned that a whole civilization will die in Iran. It's also the lead story for The Telegraph, which reports that world leaders are calling for calm amid the threats. The Earthset picture also there, as you can see. Same for The Times too. It leads on the White House saying it's ruled out using nuclear weapons against Iran, despite the strength of the language from Donald Trump. The front of the Metro reads humanity's new historic view of a world in deep trouble as the crew of Artemis 2 look down at Earth amidst the escalating war in Iran. A similar take from the Daily Mirror, which says the world holds its breath with regard to the US president's threats. The Daily Mail also goes with that line as peace talks go down to the wire, showing what's been described as human shields on bridges and at power stations in Iran. The Eye says the UK is making a plea for peace in response to Donald Trump's warning. Well, the Star describes the situation as the end of the world as we know it. The Financial Times says hedge funds are betting against European stocks, predicting that the continent will continue to be hit hard by the war. The Sun leads on the banning of rapper Kanye West from the UK and the cancelling of the Wireless Music Festival, which he was set to headline. And the Express leads on comments from Siobhan White, whose daughter was murdered by an asylum seeker, calling the UK a laughingstock when it comes to immigration, a familiar theme, obviously, for the Daily Express. So let us talk more then, and we'll start with The Times. We won't use nuclear weapons. This was after J.D. Vance says we have more tools in our armoury to use while meeting the Hungarian leader. So nonetheless, the threat is severe in terms of the language from Donald Trump.
I just think it's shocking that they're having to clarify. How is this a headline that we're seriously looking at the US having to say, we won't use nuclear bombs? You know, they're answering a question that people have rightfully had when you're talking about, you know, killing an entire civilization. That is what springs to mind. And I think it shows you just how far we've come and that this is a serious headline, you know, and something people are seriously considering. And I think, you know, we've seen Pakistan obviously coming out tonight with perhaps the most serious, palpable attempt at peace negotiations, appealing to both sides, one to extend the deadline from the US and for Iran to open up the Strait of Hormuz as a goodwill gesture. But I do worry a little bit about...
OK, I'm just going to break in, if you don't mind. Some breaking news, actually, quoted by the Reuters news agency, suggesting that Trump has said, I agree to suspend bombing and the attack of Iran for a period of 2 weeks. He goes on to say this will be a double-sided ceasefire, and then going on to say we received a 10-point proposal from Iran and believe it is a workable basis on which to negotiate. Going on to say almost all of the various points of the past contention have been agreed to between the United States and Iran. A 2-week period will allow agreement to be finalised and consummated, is the language used there. So this is after Pakistan suggested that Iran should open the Strait of Hormuz to all traffic as a gesture of goodwill, and that Donald Trump should remove the threat of attacks on power stations and bridges for a period of 2 weeks. We know the Pakistanis have been speaking tonight to other key mediators in the region, namely Turkey and Egypt. One more line from Donald Trump. I'm presuming this is a Truth Social post, which we'll get up for you in a moment. We are very far along with a definitive agreement concerning long-term peace with Iran. And as I mentioned earlier, some people in Washington have described the threats against the whole civilization of Iran, thousands of years of it, as a negotiating tactic. Does that tactic appear to have worked? Mark Stone is coming up in just a moment. We know that Marco Rubio, pictured there with the US President, has spoken to Yvette Cooper, the UK Foreign Secretary, as well tonight. We know that a number of nations have urged calm and peace, including, in fact, Pope Leo, who has suggested that the use of the language about the destruction of civilization is truly unacceptable. Let's bring in our Washington correspondent, Mark Stone, agreeing then, it appears, from Trump to suspend the bombing and attack of Iran for a period of 2 weeks. But is this something deeper, Mark? Does this seem to suggest an agreement to end this conflict?
Sorry, my phone is just going off as you come to me. Anna, let me switch that off. Yeah, I mean, well, as many predicted, he has, some would say, tacoed. Trump always chickens out. He has accepted, in diplomatic terms, the conversation, the suggestion by the Pakistani Prime Minister. I don't know if we've got the full statement that we can get up on the screen, but I could read it out to you because it clearly is vital. He writes just 2 minutes ago on Truth Social, based on conversations with Prime Minister Sharif and Field Marshal Munir of Pakistan, and wherein they requested that I hold off the destructive force being sent tonight to Iran, the subject to the Islamic Republic of Iran agreeing to the complete, immediate and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz. I agree to suspend the bombing and attack of Iran for a period of 2 weeks. The president goes on to say, this will be a double-sided ceasefire. The reason for doing that is so that we have already met and exceeded all the military objectives and are very far along with the definitive agreement concerning long-term peace with Iran and peace in the Middle East. We received a 10-point proposal from Iran and believe it is a workable basis on which to negotiate. Almost all of the various points of past contention have been agreed to between the United States and Iran, but a 2-week period will allow the agreement to be finalized and consummated. On behalf of the United States of America as president and representing the countries of the Middle East, it's an honor to have this long-term problem close to resolution. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So a lengthy post there by the American president, which calls off what he said would be effectively civilizational erasure. Just an hour, well, 12 hours or so ago. The deadline that he had set was an hour and a half's time, 8 o'clock Eastern time. But now, in a lengthy tweet, a lengthy post, he is claiming that the war objectives have been met, that Iran is now complying, that the Strait of Hormuz will be open, and that in this 2-week period, all of that can be finalized.
Yes, I mean, we wait to see, global oil futures reaction. We wait to see if some of the vessels which have been trapped in the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf start to move, whether this is meaningful, because there have been bombing attacks tonight, we know, in Baghdad, Doha, the UAE as well, countering missiles. So it's been very febrile. So, the practical steps next will be fascinating for the World Economic Order to look at.
Yeah, and step one is Iran reopening, or allowing, I should say. I mean, the Strait of Hormuz, as we discussed earlier, is already open to certain countries, but allowing the free flow of oil traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. This statement from the president says it is subject to the Islamic Republic of Iran agreeing to the complete, immediate and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz. So it's dependent on Iran doing something now and being seen to do something physically on the Strait of Hormuz. So we'll await. I mean, it's clearly the middle of the night there now, but we will await to hear in the coming hours whether or not traffic is moving freely. And of course, don't expect ships to suddenly turn on their engines and start flowing through. There clearly is a massive risk that the owners of these vessels will be asked to take, and indeed the insurance companies as well. So it's not as if they could just simply turn on their engines and flow through. They've got to be satisfied that the Iranians are not going to attack them. So there's a few hoops to go through, but I think we can say right now that the deadline that the president set for 8 o'clock Eastern time this evening, that has now been suspended for a period of 2 weeks.
Yeah, Mark, stay there if you don't mind. I read that there are roughly 2,000 ships stuck in the Persian Gulf with more than 20,000 seafarers on them, according to the International Maritime Organization based here in the UK. Most have been stuck on board more than a month because fewer than 200 ships have managed to slip through the Strait of Hormuz, many of them, of course, allies and customers of Iran. But here, Molly, it looks like the maximalist demands of Donald Trump, which his negotiating tactic, have delivered something.
For sure. I mean, there's clearly been a lot of work behind the scenes to pull back from the brink here, and I don't think we can sort of wholly credit Trump for that. There's clearly been a lot of stakeholders involved in that, not least Pakistan, to go from language which almost appeared genocidal to where we are now. Certainly a sigh of relief across Iran and also the region and the wider world, really, to see this being rowed back on. But it'll be interesting to see the details of this 10-point proposal which Iran has agreed to. I mean, you'd assume Strait of Hormuz will be top of that agenda, but I also wonder if there'll be some agreement around the nuclear program, potentially around the regime and its engagement with the US. But there is no sort of silver bullet here. Whilst it's positive to see this be put on pause, we obviously don't know what will happen after that 2-week period. And even if this all stops today, the instability that has been sort of created across the region, both politically, economically, socially and militarily, will be felt for a long time to come. I mean, there's been allegations that the Strait of Hormuz has been mined. Whether that is true or not, we're not quite sure. But if it is, that will take a very long time to be clear. And as Mark alluded to, it'll take a long time to build confidence that the region is stable again, both for commercial vessels, but also everyone else. So certainly positive news, but I think there's a lot to still be uncovered about what's going on here.
Yes, Mark, I think you're getting more reaction.
No, just looking at oil prices are plummeting after his announcement, which is clearly interesting. That is clearly one key focus. That is the consumer focus. That is the real life issue that is facing people around the world. Mainly in Asia, it has to be said, where there has been significant petrol shortages and all the knock-ons that entails. So that will be a story in the morning, of course, as we see markets continue to open. How will they react? The other thing that's interesting, and I'm as ever with President Trump's posts, they're thick in that they are one wodge of text. He doesn't use very many, he certainly doesn't use paragraphs, does he? So as I'm looking at it again, it's interesting he talks about a double-sided ceasefire. What he means by that is that it won't just be the Iranians ceasing fire as he expects them to, but also the Americans. And he says the reason for doing so is that we have already met and exceeded all our military objectives. Well, that's debatable, isn't it? Because Iran still has nuclear capability in the sense that the nuclear material is still unaccounted for, and it is in Iran. Iran still has the ability to fire ballistic missiles at regional countries because it has been doing so in the last few days. And indeed, Israeli assessments suggest that they have perhaps thousands of ballistic missiles still in their arsenal. So there are two military objectives not met, despite the fact that Trump says they've been met. And then, of course, whether he now classes it as an objective or not, regime change. Well, the regime plainly has not changed. It is the same regime in power now, and many Iran watchers, people who perhaps watch Iran a little more closely than President Trump does, will tell you that, in fact, the regime that is in power now is more extreme, more hardline, and has more of an axe to grind with the West, certainly with America, than the one that was there a month ago. So an interesting point there about the extent to which the military objectives have actually been met. And further to that, Anna, I'm just sort of thinking about it as it comes to be now. It's not as though Iran has actually announced anything over the course of the last couple of hours, which would be a sort of backing down on the Iranian side. They've said nothing. The only thing that has happened is that the Pakistanis have stood up and tried to insert some calm diplomacy, which has actually prompted the president, the American president, to back down. So it is not the case that the Iranians have conceded to America's demands. It is simply the case that a third country, Pakistan, has got involved, has pleaded effectively, and that's what the Pakistani Prime Minister's tweet said earlier on. I sort of humbly call on the American president to put in place a pause for 2 weeks, and that is what he has done. So this isn't a case of Iran backing down and the Americans, the White House, winning. It is, some might say, Trump chickening out.
Yes, and as we speak, I see that the Reuters news agency is quoting the Israeli military as saying it's identified missiles launched from Iran towards Israel, presumably ahead of the prospective 1 a.m. UK deadline. So if you're just joining us, the breaking news is that Donald Trump has suspended his threatened action against Iran for a period of 2 weeks, suggesting there is a 10-point plan suggested by the Iranians on the table. And certainly yesterday, the New York Times listed some elements of that 10-point plan, speaking to two senior Iranian officials. It said the proposal included a guarantee that Iran would not be attacked again, an end to Israeli strikes against Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is an interesting part of this, and the lifting of all sanctions. In return, the New York Times suggested Iran would lift its de facto blockade of the key shipping route through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran, this is an interesting one, would also impose a fee of roughly $2 million per ship that it would split with Oman, which sits across the strait. Iran would use its share of the proceeds to reconstruct infrastructure destroyed by American and Israeli attacks rather than demand direct compensation. So that is part of the plan, as reported yesterday by the New York Times. Donald Trump tonight suggesting that large parts of disagreements have been met. Sebastian, your thoughts?
I mean, it's very hard to look at this, and obviously it's still emerging details. It is anything but Donald Trump backing down at this stage, because he's been making these very apocalyptic threats about targeting Iran for the past couple of days, but nothing of substance has really changed. You mentioned that 10-point plan, which has been kicking around for a couple of days now. That plan seems to be very biased in Iran's favour by giving them this extra revenue from the Strait of Hormuz, by stopping the US attacks on Iran, which are obviously causing devastating damage. And it's not clear what America gets off the back of this, because if you go to the beginning of this war, this was meant to be about destabilising the theocratic regime. That has not happened. We've now got a new regime, which in some ways is more extreme and more hardline than the one before it. So what it does feel like is what we talked about earlier in the programme, which is the good old taco, which is Trump Trump always chickens out. And the fact is, ever since this war began, he's been looking for an off-ramp to find a way of ending the hostilities without looking as if he's backed down. And that's sort of what he's got now. So he's clearly going to say this new regime is much better, much more workable than the old one. This is the end of the one we've won. But I'd say the question for you is, what does Israel think about this? Because we know from a lot of reporting that Israel was a key factor in this war beginning when they targeted taking out the previous supreme leader and also key infrastructure points across Iran. Are they on board with this? Were they engaged with this process? It's a very interesting question. But, I mean, we can all breathe a sigh of relief. I think that deadline is not something any of us were looking forward to with particular appetite. But the fact is, it doesn't really answer any questions about what the future looks like and how this conflict is actually going to end. Because if it ends now in a stalemate, then that is permanent instability, as Mark was saying about the shipping lanes there, because it's going to be a long time before there is confidence to get those lanes opened up again. And it's not clear how you're going to get stabilised security within the region, given what's happened over the past couple of weeks.
Yes, indeed. So, I mean, Mark, we've got the front page of tomorrow's Times newspaper quoting America, "We won't use nuclear bombs." We had an earlier Truth Social post from Donald Trump, you know, threatening to end the civilization of Persia, effectively, thousands of years old. You know, rhetoric can only go so far. You couldn't get more inflammatory than denying the use of nuclear weapons and ending civilizations.
Yeah, spur of thought for the newspapers whose headlines may have to be rewritten now, given the timing of all this. Look, you have to wonder what is the point of this rhetoric by President Trump. I mean, a lot of as we were discussing earlier, a lot of the time he does back down, but not all the time. I mean, remember, Mark, it was a month ago, 5 weeks or so ago.
US networks are now suggesting that a White House official has suggested that Israel has also agreed to a temporary ceasefire. That question about what would happen with Lebanon. So just throwing that into the mix. I don't know if you'll get confirmation of that as well at some point. But and as you suggested, oil prices are plunging. The suggestion from one US network that Israel has also agreed to a temporary ceasefire.
Well, let's see, because Israel's war objectives are not aligned with the American war objectives and have increasingly been disaligned, given that Israel wants to continue this war, wants to decapitate the regime once and for all, wants to get hold of that nuclear material, wants to make sure that Iran does not possess any ballistic missiles. These are all war aims that Israel is absolutely serious about, but the American president, because he now appears to want to bring this to an end, is less serious about. So let's see on that one. But I don't have any more detail, Anna, on what you're saying from the US networks, but I'm sure we will get some. I imagine we'll get some background briefing from the White House shortly, which will add a bit of context to that chunk from Donald Trump on Truth Social.
Yes, and you were quoting crude futures, US crude oil. We're now learning sliding 8% to around $103 a barrel after trading as high as $117 a barrel earlier today. S&P futures are also higher by more than 1.6%. I see spot silver has risen as well. So the global markets, the commodities markets are shifting again. But an 8% fall in US crude oil will certainly be welcome. This has been an economic war, Molly.
Absolutely, it has. This has been Iran's key card, really, to play, is the economic disruption. It can't compete with the US and Israel on pure military capabilities, but what it can do is disrupt global shipping and global oil and gas supplies, which has a huge knock-on effect on energy and various product prices around the world, including here in the UK. And it has flexed that muscle, you know, throughout this conflict. So as you say, that will be welcome, but it's incredible, isn't it, just how much the price of oil can change within a Truth Social post. And I would expect, you know, this isn't just going to stay low now. This won't be the end of this saga. There will be fluctuations as this 10-point proposal comes out in full, as the next 2 weeks progresses, and we see if this ceasefire does actually hold.
Yeah, quick word, Sebastian, yeah.
And I think, you know, what everyone is craving is certainty and stability. And this is the first time we've had that since this war began, because we've not known on what terms or what it might look like and where the limits of what the president will do. I think we've got a sense of where the limits are now, you know, with that big threat. And he will no doubt claim in the coming days that this proposal and this ceasefire was a result of those kind of threats. But ultimately, it's going to take a long time to get the shipping flowing again, and a long time till we know what the impact on oil production is. And I think we are right at the cusp point as well of when the UK would be facing energy shortages if oil and liquid natural gas does not start flowing through the Strait of Hormuz again. So it might be, if this ceasefire holds and it continues, a lot of Western nations will be very grateful because it will not give them energy shortages. But again, it's a very volatile situation, as Mark was saying. You could see Israel having different war objectives, getting stuck in again. And that's what's going to see, does this thing hold and is it stable beyond the 2 weeks?
Yes, Mark, final thought from you. Is this the beginning of the end of this conflict, do you think?
Maybe, but the fact that the Iranians are reportedly firing ballistic missiles at Israel right now, it just shows that Donald Trump can say whatever he likes, but all the different parties have to sign up to this. The Israelis, as you were just saying with Sebastian, have different war aims, so they may not necessarily sign up to this. How long will they stick to it? We know that Netanyahu and Trump have not seen eye to eye before on a number of occasions, on a number of issues. And what's to say that different factions within Iran, different parts of the structure, the government structure in Iran, why will they all sign up to this? It's very easy to see how this could very quickly fall apart. But right now, it is without doubt the case that all that bombast from the American president, all those extraordinary threats that are unprecedented from an American president, they've been shelved for a couple of weeks.
Mark Stone, live for us. Thank you very much indeed. So, as Mark was suggesting there, loud bangs and explosions being heard right now across Jerusalem. The Israeli military has said it's identified missiles launched from Iran towards Israel, just as Donald Trump pulls back from the brink, agreeing to a 2-week ceasefire, suggesting this will be a double-sided ceasefire after the Islamic Republic of Iran agrees to the complete, immediate and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz. Gold futures down 8%. Molly, Sebastian, thank you.